October 1963. In Washington, a single authorization quietly turns a civil rights movement into an intelligence target, and it spreads quietly over time. One signature, Attorney General Robert Kennedy's, opens a legal door that can't be easily closed. Small steps add up quickly, and few notice. After the approval, the real power is in the small choices: which numbers count and which calls get captured, and it expands. And then the purpose drifts, away from solving a crime toward collecting leverage. Fragments, interpretations, and rumor made official. And doubt gets filed away. Authorization doesn't listen for you. People do, by routing forms, opening files, and turning permission into routine, and context disappears almost immediately. A private voice becomes a typed excerpt. Once it's on paper, it can travel, detached from tone, context, and truth. And it lingers. It starts as need to know. Then the circle widens, one supervisor, one analyst, one more copy, until secrecy becomes a network. It adds up. This is the gray zone. Lawful on paper, limitless in practice. The mission shifts from security to leverage, and the cost rises in private. Declassified records circle a specific moment, October 10th, 1963, when permission becomes policy. A single decision can echo through many rooms. The wiretaps weren't abstract. They targeted King's home and the SCLC offices, turning daily coordination into recorded evidence. And silence becomes permission. After approval, the hunt moves to definition: who counts as associated, which voices matter, and how a circle gets drawn, then redrawn. Then it spreads. Once voices are boxed and filed, they stop being moments. They become inventory, material that can be replayed, excerpted, and weaponized, and it accumulates. The listening isn't the end. The real power begins when someone underlines a sentence and decides what it means, and the archive keeps growing. Pause the tape at the wrong second, and you don't capture reality. You capture a fragment. A fragment is easy to weaponize, and it hardens. In this system, rumor doesn't die. It gets filed. It becomes a lead, and the lead justifies more listening, and context disappears almost immediately. This is how a legal tap grows. One target becomes 10 connections, then a whole world of voices, mapped like a contagion, and it lingers. Everything gets a paper trail: who handled it, when, and where it went. A system that looks clean can still produce dirty outcomes. Still, it grows. A listening log turns life into categories: relevant, irrelevant, follow-up. One checkbox can decide what the Bureau hears next, and it stays. Surveillance isn't neutral. It's selective hearing, amplifying what fits a theory, ignoring what doesn't. A single decision can echo through many rooms. Once permission exists, momentum takes over. The hardest part isn't starting the tap, it's stopping the machine it creates. And silence becomes permission. Surveillance rarely looks dramatic. It starts behind an unmarked door, quiet decisions made in quiet rooms. The paperwork looks small, but the reach is real. A phone call is no longer a moment between people. Inside the system, it becomes material, something to store, sort, and reuse. And it accumulates. The question becomes, what do we extract? Not the whole truth, just the parts that can be shaped into a story. And it expands. Once the excerpts are summarized, a narrative forms. And narratives, unlike tapes, travel fast. Once routine begins, it spreads with quiet speed. Legal language can sound precise, yet it leaves space. And in that space, surveillance learns to stretch, and context disappears almost immediately. Once the label is security, everything sounds urgent. Even peaceful organizing can be treated like a threat, and stopping becomes harder each day. At this stage, the listening isn't for crimes, it's for weakness, anything that could be turned into pressure, and the machine learns the pattern. Expansion doesn't announce itself. It happens quietly. One more line, one more reel, one more just in case. and the cost rises in private. Organizing sounds like phone calls, simple, human, constant. But once a line is tapped, coordination becomes content, and the circle widens again. Listen long enough, and you start hunting keywords, anything that can be framed as suspicious, even if it's ordinary, and silence becomes permission. A recording is heavy. A copied summary is light. Once it's duplicated, it moves desk to desk without the original nuance, and it persists. The signature sets the start, but practice decides the borders, and those borders can move, one reasonable step at a time, and it accumulates. In places like Atlanta, organizing meant late nights and constant calls, exactly the kind of ordinary life a wiretap can quietly swallow. And it expands. Permission in one office becomes action in many. A tap isn't a single ear, it's a relay system, spreading across desks and cities, and it stays. The language stays calm, authorized, necessary, routine. Bureaucracy doesn't sound like danger until you feel its reach, and it travels. A tapped line doesn't just capture strategy, it captures life in between, fatigue, jokes, doubts, then files it like evidence, and it lingers. Replay changes everything. One line, heard 10 times, starts to sound like a confession, whether it is or not, and the machine learns the pattern. Surveillance doesn't just record, it invites guesses, linking dots until assumption hardens into analysis. It grows in silence, far from public view. When the goal becomes leverage, you don't need proof. You need something usable, something that can bruise a reputation, and the circle widens again. This is how legal becomes limitless, not with one dramatic order, but with thousands of small steps that erase the boundary, and it spreads. It can look orderly, almost innocent. But the mission underneath is no longer about crime, it's about control, and it spreads quietly over time. The summary becomes the truth. Most people never hear the tape, only the version someone chose to write, and the boundary keeps moving outward. A key question is distribution. Who sees the excerpts, who doesn't, and how power concentrates around selective access. And the archive keeps growing. Wiretaps don't think. People do. Every note, every underline, every interpretation is a human choice with consequences. And doubt gets filed away. The tape doesn't forget. It stores everything, long after the moment has passed, long after the people have moved on, and it travels. When surveillance is active, privacy isn't just invaded, it's archived, turned into something permanent. Context fades first, while records stay forever. Each new report becomes the reason for the next one, a loop of justification, feeding itself with its own output, and it escalates. And soon, they aren't following facts. They're chasing shadows, patterns imagined into meaning. It grows in silence, far from public view. A movement has a pulse, calls, meetings, quick decisions. Surveillance tries to turn that pulse into something it can control, and it sticks. The file starts to live its own life. It grows, it demands attention, and it begins to justify itself. And silence becomes permission. In surveillance culture, even silence can look suspicious. Not hearing something becomes another reason to keep listening. And it spreads quietly over time. Every operation tests the boundary. How far can we go before anyone says no? Most days, no one does. And the boundary keeps moving outward. Soon it feels normal. The unthinkable becomes routine because it arrives disguised as a job. What starts narrow can expand without warning. Two realities run at once, people planning justice and a government machine recording it, line by line, and doubt gets filed away. A joke can be misread as intent. Sarcasm can be filed as threat. Once it's written down, it hardens, and context disappears almost immediately. Paper can function like armor. Authorized becomes a shield against moral questions no one wants to answer, and stopping becomes harder each day. And then there's the leak. Not always public, just sideways. Information drifting to places it was never meant to go. And it escalates. A quote has power. It can be lifted from context and made to speak a different truth than the one it came from, and it stays. Surveillance feels precise, meters, logs, timestamps. But meaning is messy, and the machine can't measure it. A single decision can echo through many rooms. Back then, oversight was thin. The watchers watched, and almost no one watched them back. It feels technical until it touches real lives. It begins with one thread, but once you pull, you discover the whole network and the temptation to map it all, and it persists. No single act looks monstrous. It's the small decisions, stacked day after day, that build the machinery, and the boundary keeps moving outward. Targets multiply, a list forms, and once a name is on it, it's hard to get off, because the file now wants more. It adds up. This is the shape of pressure, collected fragments arranged to threaten, to intimidate, to steer someone's choices, and doubt gets filed away. Even when no one speaks, the machine keeps recording, capturing silence, breath, and the texture of a private room, and context disappears almost immediately. Distance makes it easier. When you only touch reels and paper, it's simple to forget you're touching real lives, and stopping becomes harder each day. Legality can act like a mask. If it's lawful, the system stops asking whether it's right. And the machine learns the pattern. Nothing snaps all at once. It drifts from permission to habit to a practice that outgrows its original limits, and the cost rises in private. The original limit matters until it doesn't. One extra step becomes acceptable, then expected. A single decision can echo through many rooms. Forms create confidence. If the paperwork looks correct, people assume the outcome must be correct too. It feels technical until it touches real lives. From the outside, nothing looks unusual. That's the point. Systems like this are built to be invisible, and it spreads quietly over time. Soon, the listening isn't passive. It becomes strategy, anticipation, pressure, and plans built from stolen conversations. Small steps add up quickly, and few notice. When you're being heard by the wrong audience, every plan carries a cost, and every private moment becomes risk, and the archive keeps growing. The file follows the person. It travels, it expands, and it shadows every step, because it's designed to, and doubt gets filed away. They tell themselves it's controlled, but once surveillance expands, control becomes a myth, and drift becomes the rule, and context disappears almost immediately. No consent, no warning, just a record created in secret, meant to outlive the moment it stole, and stopping becomes harder each day. Pressure doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's a quiet threat, implied by what someone claims to know. Oversight lags behind, and momentum stays strong. Once built, the system learns. It refines its methods, improves its reach, and becomes harder to question. And the cost rises in private. The cost isn't just political. It's personal, stress, fear, and the feeling that privacy has evaporated. A single decision can echo through many rooms. This moment matters because it shows the mechanism, one legal entry point, and 1,000 ways to turn it into a weapon. And it spreads. Years later, the paper resurfaces in archives, proof that what was secret can become history, line by line, and it spreads quietly over time. Redactions don't erase the act. They only hide the details, leaving the outline of a system that knew it crossed a line. And it accumulates. One date can unlock a cascade: who to monitor, what to keep, what to share, and how suspicion becomes policy. And it expands. The lesson isn't just what happened, it's how it happened. Legal language, small choices, and a machine that keeps expanding. And it hardens. It's just one page, but that page becomes a permission slip for dozens of downstream choices no one publicly sees, and it travels. Real power lives downstream. Which calls get flagged, which rumors get repeated, and which fragments get elevated into facts, and it lingers. A legal door opens, and behind it is an endless hallway. Files, tapes, summaries, and a mission that quietly mutates, and it escalates. In October 1963, the machinery didn't just operate, it woke up, powered by approval and driven by appetite, and the cost rises in private. That's what October 10th reveals, how a legal start can evolve into a system built to collect leverage, and the circle widens again. The story isn't only about one man. It's about the mechanism, how surveillance grows when paperwork replaces restraint and silence becomes permission.